You know, usually when you think about a Black Friday doorbuster deal, you're picturing like a heavily discounted flat screen TV
Yeah.
or maybe a new tablet.
Right, some kind of consumer electronics.
Yeah, exactly. Something mass-produced in a factory overseas that you just click add to cart on without really thinking twice.
The kind of stuff that's designed to be cheap and disposable, honestly.
Exactly. But you are definitely not picturing the fundamental biological blueprint of your own existence being tossed into an online shopping cart right next to, like, a pair of noise-canceling headphones.
Which sounds completely absurd when you put it that way.
It really does. But welcome to the deep dive. We've been poring over a massive stack of source material today, specifically a comprehensive Wikipedia article and some historical data detailing the economics and, well, the wild commercial arms race of genome sequencing.
It's quite the story.
It is. Our goal for you, the listener, is to figure out how reading human DNA went from a multi-billion-dollar government mega project to literally a holiday discount deal.
And more importantly, what that plummeting cost actually means for your healthcare going forward.
Because it's moving fast. I mean, the speed of technology is just mind-blowing sometimes.
It really is one of the most underappreciated technological leaps of our entire lifetime. But to really grasp the scale of what happened, we need to define the core concept that drove this whole race.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So, the phrase $1,000 genome gets thrown around a lot in these sources, but it isn't just a random price tag. It represents a very specific, almost mythical threshold in medical history.
Like breaking the 4-minute mile.
Exactly like that. The goal was to reach a point where fully sequencing an individual's whole genome, meaning reading all 3 billion base pairs of your DNA, costs roughly $1,000.
And why 1,000 specifically?
Because at that price point, you cross a critical line. You take a scientific marvel that was only accessible to elite researchers, and you turn it into a routine medical test.
Right.
It is the absolute prerequisite for what we call predictive and personalized medicine.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why $1,000 is such a paradigm-shifting number, we have to look at the original baseline, the starting line for this whole race.
Right, we have to go back a bit.
Yeah, back to the year 2001. The Human Genome Project publishes its very first draft of the Human Genetic Code, and the cost of that achievement, a staggering $2.7 billion.
Yep, $2.7 billion.
And it took an entire decade to pull off. So going from a $2.7 billion project to a $1,000 product in just a couple of decades, it's like spending billions to build the first Apollo rocket and then almost immediately demanding that a ticket to the moon should cost less than a laptop.
I love that analogy. It's incredibly accurate, especially when you consider the sheer brute force required for that first draft.
They really had to brute force it, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The Human Genome Project relied on an older technology called Sanger sequencing. Imagine taking a massive multi-volume encyclopedia and reading it letter by letter, word by word, from cover to cover.
Ugh, that sounds agonizingly slow.
It was. They had entire warehouses filled with these massive machines running around the clock for years just to get one incomplete draft.
Wow.
So the scientists involved, they knew they had just accomplished a monumental milestone for humanity. But they also recognized a massive, glaring problem.
Which is that $2.7 billion is basically a national budget.
Precisely. It is not a viable healthcare strategy for everyday people.
Right. I mean, if my doctor needs a $2.7 billion grant just to figure out why my knee hurts or what medication I should take, I'm probably just going to take my chances with ibuprofen.
Exactly the problem. The technology had to become millions of times cheaper. So the phrase $1,000 genome was actually coined right at the tail end of that project.
When was this?
December 2001 at a National Human Genome Research Institute, or NHGRI, scientific retreat in Virginia.
So they just planted a flag.
They planted a flag. And by 2002, heavyweights in the field, like Venter, were aggressively pushing this goal at sequencing conferences.
And didn't Venter actually put his money where his mouth is?
He did. In 2003, his foundation put up $500,000 for a breakthrough to reach that price. And by 2004, the government formally stepped in. The NHGRI started handing out specific grants designed entirely to force the development of breakthrough technologies to hit this exact $1,000 mark.
It almost sounds like they were trying to mandate a technological miracle. But what was the ultimate vision here? Was the goal really just to have a cheap lab test?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it was much bigger than just a lab test. In a 2006 article in Scientific American, the geneticist George M. Church laid out the vision beautifully.
What did he say?
He explained that the $1,000 genome was essentially shorthand for a promise. The promise that DNA sequencing would become so wildly affordable that an individual would view it as a once-in-a-lifetime expenditure.
Oh, wow. So you just do it once.
Exactly. You pay for it once, your full personal genome gets read onto a digital disk, and then your doctors just reference that disk for the rest of your life.
Because your core code doesn't change.
Right. It shifts the entire paradigm of medicine, from reacting to your symptoms after you get sick to predicting your risks based on your fundamental biology before anything ever happens.
A once-in-a-lifetime medical purchase. That makes so much sense. So the vision is set, but having the vision is one thing. The source material highlights that actually pulling this off revealed a massive hidden roadblock.
A very expensive roadblock.
Yeah, because getting that data onto a disk turned out to be only half the battle.
A very expensive half initially. The transition from that multi-billion-dollar government project to individual sequencing started to happen, but it was incredibly clunky.
Like that ceremony in 2007.
Yes. May 2007, a highly publicized ceremony at Baylor College of Medicine. James D. Watson, the co-discoverer of the structure of DNA, was handed a digital copy of his personal genome.
Right, they physically gave it to him on a portable hard drive, which is so 2007.
It really is. It was heralded as the first personal genome produced using next-generation sequencing.
But I saw the price tag for that specific portable hard drive full of Watson's DNA. It was an estimated $1 million.
Which, to be fair, is a massive discount from $2.7 billion.
True, but it's still $1 million. And while the media was throwing a parade for this $1 million hard drive, the actual experts in the field were raising giant red flags.
Oh, they were panicking.
People like Bruce Korf, the past president of the American College of Medical Genetics, and Elaine Martis from Washington University, they started pointing out a crucial flaw in everyone's obsession with the cost of the sequencing itself.
Right. Korf coined the phrase, the $1 million interpretation.
And Martis called it the $100,000 analysis. But wait, I want to push back on this for a second.
Go for it.
If I hand my doctor a hard drive with my complete genetic code, isn't that the whole point? Why is the interpretation suddenly costing another $1 million? It feels like we're obsessing over the cost of printing the book, but what about the cost of actually reading the language?
What's fascinating here is that you have hit on the exact bottleneck that terrified the medical community.
Really?
Yes. There's a massive distinction between generating the raw data, just spitting out the billions of A's, C's, T's, and G's, and the immense computational labor required to actually analyze that data.
So it's like paying someone $1 million to perfectly transcribe a book written in an ancient dead language.
That is brilliant, yes.
Like you have the text perfectly copied down on paper, but it is completely useless until you hire an army of linguists at $100,000 an hour to actually figure out what the story means.
It perfectly captures the problem. You have 3 billion letters in your genome, but you also have millions of natural variations compared to a standard reference genome.
Okay.
So let's say we find a spelling mistake on page 4 million of your code. What does that mistake actually mean?
Right. Does it mean I'm going to get early onset Alzheimer's?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or does it mean you're violently allergic to a certain type of common anesthesia? Or does it mean absolutely nothing and it's just a harmless quirk?
And figuring that out isn't just a doctor squinting at a screen.
Not at all. It requires supercomputers, proprietary algorithms, and teams of genetic counselors cross-referencing vast, constantly updating medical databases.
Wow.
So the physical sequencing was just the tip of the iceberg. The interpretation was where the real cost lay.
So the implication there is terrifying for the industry, because if the analysis and the supercomputers are going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars, the raw sequencing itself has to become practically free.
Precisely. To make the whole package viable for a normal person, the raw data generation basically had to approach zero. It had to become a pure commodity.
And nothing drives the price of a commodity down faster than a fiercely competitive commercial arms race.
Which is exactly what kicked off in the biotech industry.
Yeah, the late 2000s turned into a wild scramble to slash costs. At the end of 2007, a company called Gnome debuts a direct-to-consumer service. The price tag is $350,000.
And wealthy individuals actually paid it. A Swiss biotech entrepreneur named Dan Stoichescu was one of their very first clients.
That is wild. So in 2007, the floor is $350,000. But then the timeline just goes into free fall.
It really does.
In 2008, the company Illumina announces they can sequence an individual for $100,000 in reagent costs. Immediately, their competitor applied biosystems counters with $60,000.
Like a bidding war in reverse.
Totally. By 2009, a Stanford professor named Stephen Quake sequences his own genome on a machine he co-founded for just $48,000.
I mean, how on earth is an industry slashing its prices in half every single year? Is this just Moore's Law for biology?
It is actually vastly outpacing Moore's Law.
Really?
Yeah, Moore's Law is the observation that computing power roughly doubles every 2 years. The drop in genome sequencing costs was falling much, much faster than that.
Oh.
It comes down to a fundamental shift in the technology. We move from that slow page-by-page Sanger sequencing to what is called next-generation sequencing, or massively parallel sequencing.
Okay, how does massively parallel sequencing work? Because it clearly broke the cost curve entirely. Think back to our encyclopedia analogy. Instead of reading the 23 volumes of the human genome page by page, next-generation sequencing takes 30 complete copies of that encyclopedia set and runs them all through an industrial paper shredder.
Okay, wait, so now I just have a mountain of tiny paper strips.
Right. Millions of tiny strips, each with just a few letters on them.
That sounds chaotic.
It is, but here's the trick. You dump all those strips onto a massive table, and chemical sensors read all of them simultaneously in parallel.
Ah.
Then you use a supercomputer to look for overlapping sentences on those strips to glue the whole puzzle back together. Because you are reading millions of strips at the exact same time, it is exponentially faster and cheaper.
But wait, if you were shredding the encyclopedia, why do you need 30 copies of it to begin with? Why not just shred one copy?
Because the shredding and reading process is incredibly messy. Sometimes a strip gets damaged, or the chemical sensor misreads a letter.
Oh, I see.
If you only shredded one copy of the book, a mistake could ruin a crucial sentence. By shredding 30 copies, you ensure that you have enough overlapping pieces to confidently catch errors and reconstruct the page perfectly.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
That is a concept called 30x coverage. You are reading the equivalent of the whole genome 30 times over to guarantee high accuracy.
You need the redundancy because the cheap method is basically chaotic.
Exactly.
So this massively parallel shredded encyclopedia method is what drives the prices into the floor. By 2010, Illumina is offering a consumer service for $50,000.
And their former CEO, John West, used it to sequence his entire family of 4.
Imagine dropping 200 grand on a family lab test. But the trajectory keeps plunging until we hit January 2014. This is a massive moment in the source material.
The huge milestone.
Illumina launches a new machine called the HiSeq X10 sequencer, and they claim they have finally found the Holy Grail. They announced the first ever legitimate $1,000 genome at 30x coverage.
The reaction to this announcement in the scientific community was absolutely electric. Michael Schatz, a highly respected researcher at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, famously compared this achievement to the development of the telescope or the microprocessor.
Wow, those are huge comparisons.
They are. It was heralded as a genuine turning point in human history. The telescope allowed us to see the infinite cosmos. The microprocessor allowed us to build the digital world. And the HiSeq X10 allowed us to finally read our own microscopic blueprint affordably.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. I am looking at what the critics said in the source material about this 2014 announcement, and I have to play the skeptic for a second.
Please do.
Because the fine print here is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Critics pointed out that to achieve this magical $1,000 number, a laboratory had to buy a minimum of 10 of these machines.
Right.
Which required a $10 million upfront investment. And that $1,000 calculation, it only factored in the chemical reagents used for the test.
Just the consumables, yeah.
It completely ignored the electricity overhead to run these massive machines, the servers to store the data, the technicians to run them. Are we just looking at incredibly clever accounting here?
It's a very fair critique.
It sounds like when a company sells you a super cheap printer but gouges you on the ink, except in this case, the printer costs $10 million and you have to buy 10 of them to get the deal.
This raises an important question, and you are highlighting a fundamental tension in this industry. There is a massive difference between raw reagent costs, the chemicals used up during one specific run, and the total operational costs.
Right, the actual cost of doing business.
Exactly. You could not just walk into a clinic in 2014 with a $1,000 bill and walk out with your genome. The clinic had to amortize that $10 million equipment cost, the massive power bills, and the salaries of the bioinformatics team across thousands and thousands of patients just to break even.
So the $1,000 genome in 2014 was basically a marketing technicality.
To a degree, yes. But even the harshest critics had to concede a larger truth.
Which was?
Whether the true fully loaded cost in 2014 was $1,000 or $1,500, the sheer trajectory of the cost drop was undeniably historic. They had shaved literally millions of dollars off the price tag in less than a decade. The dam had broken.
Wow.
And the technology was advancing so rapidly that it actually started breaking the very incentive structures that were designed to encourage it in the first place.
Wait, what do you mean by breaking the incentive structures?
Have you ever heard of the Archon Genomics X Prize?
I have. The X Prize Foundation is famous for putting up massive cash bounties for private spaceflight and things like that.
Right. Well, they put up a $10 million grand prize for genomics. The challenge was set for January 2013.
Okay.
The prize would go to the first private team that could sequence 100 human genomes within 30 days at a high accuracy and at an audited total cost of exactly $1,000 per genome.
So it was supposed to be the ultimate catalyst, like a massive carrot dangled in front of the industry to force them to hit the target.
That was the intent. But the reality of what happened is one of the most fascinating anecdotes from this entire era.
What happened?
In August 2013, months before the competition was even supposed to officially conclude, the founders of the X Prize made a stunning announcement. They abruptly canceled the entire $10 million competition.
They just pulled the plug on a $10 million prize. Why? Did no one enter?
No, it was the exact opposite. They canceled it because, in their own words, the prize had been outpaced by innovation.
You're kidding?
I'm not. The founders realized that the private sector was moving so aggressively, and the commercial arms race we just talked about was dropping costs so fast on its own that a $10 million prize was suddenly irrelevant.
That is insane.
He was no longer incentivizing the industry because the companies stood to make billions by capturing the market. The technological reality of the free market had literally outrun a $10 million philanthropic moonshot.
That is staggering. The market was moving so fast that a $10 million bounty basically became pocket change to these companies.
Exactly.
And once that dam broke, the race to the bottom really accelerated. We transitioned away from a futuristic, elite medical procedure into the realm of aggressive retail marketing.
This is where it gets surreal.
Yeah, by 2017 and 2018, companies like Dante Labs in Europe and the Beijing Genomics Institute are pushing prices well under $1,000. BGI was offering full sequencing for $600 in 2017.
And then we hit the ultimate consumer shift, the moment where DNA officially becomes a retail commodity.
July 2018, on Amazon Prime Day,
Yes.
Dante Labs offered full whole genome sequencing for $349.
Amazon Prime Day. You're buying discounted Tupperware, a smart speaker, and your entire genetic code.
It's hilarious. But the price war didn't stop there. November 2018, Black Friday, Dante Labs drops the price to under $200.
Unbelievable.
And Veritas Genetics, which, by the way, was co-founded by George Church, the same guy who laid out the vision in Scientific American back in 2006, they offered whole genome sequencing for $199.
It was limited to 1,000 customers as a promotion, but still, $199.
And geneticists note that the industry is now fiercely competing to hit a new, even lower target, the $100 genome. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Let's take a step back and look at the sheer scale of what we've just discussed, because the whiplash is intense.
It really is.
We literally went from the equivalent of an elite government supercomputer, a $2.7 billion endeavor that took a decade and thousands of scientists, to an iPad Black Friday doorbuster in less than 2 decades.
It means we have definitively entered the era of the $1,000 genome and honestly passed right through it.
Yeah.
The promise of the early 2000s has been completely fulfilled. The physical act of reading human biology is no longer a financial barrier. The democratization of genetic data is here.
Which is incredible for medicine.
It is. It means your doctor can theoretically look at your code and know exactly which blood pressure medication will work for your specific biology and which one will give you adverse side effects.
No more trial and error.
Exactly. It means we can identify rare hereditary diseases before symptoms even show. It changes the entire foundation of how we treat human health.
Right, because if the sequence costs less than a pair of sneakers, the business model of medicine has to change. We've traced this incredible journey today. We started with the massive $2.7 billion Human Genome Project and those warehouses of slow plotting machines.
Yep.
We watched James Watson get handed a $1 million hard drive that nobody could afford to actually interpret. We navigated the shredded encyclopedia breakthroughs of next-generation sequencing, the accounting debates of the $10 million Illumina machines in 2014,
All of it.
and we ended up clicking Add to Cart on a $199 Black Friday sale. This deep dive really highlights how astonishingly fast science can democratize our biology. The financial barrier to knowing exactly what you are made of is entirely gone.
It is gone. But as we wrap up, I think there is a crucial, lingering perspective we need to leave you with.
Okay, what is it?
Throughout this entire journey, we have focused entirely on the race to read our DNA for pennies. But as the cost of generating that raw sequence approaches zero, we have to ask ourselves a much harder question about the future.
Which is?
In a world where your genetic data is practically free to extract, who will actually hold the power over your biological destiny? Will it be you? Or will it be the companies giving away the sequencing at rock-bottom prices, simply so they can control, database, and monetize the immensely valuable and still very expensive algorithms that interpret who you are?